to the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. Here we are in our library studio, and we have our faithful mascot to this is Wookie. And I hope you had a chance to listen to last night's program. I know it was long, some 2.5 hours, but it was extraordinary in its content. What I shared last night is that having returned to the events portrayed in the Garden of Eden, Gan Eden, this sheltered enclosure of great joy, according to the Hebrew definition of the words. The activity there, the narrative there is, to say, radically different than is supposed by those who have been somehow indoctrinated by religious jargon, is stark. There is this myth that the star of the show was man, but that's not really true. There is this myth that it was a woman named Eve that is the cause of them being booted out of the garden, but that's not true either. Doubly not true. There was no one named Eve, and she was not the reason behind the fall of man. And so last night I explained these things, and I also explained that the tree of knowledge isn't really a tree, but a person, and that person is symbolized by the tree. This is also true for the tree of lives, and it's not life singular, it's lives plural. He is also a person, symbolized simply by the tree. And I was able to demonstrate that the presentation of the choder, which is a sucker or a stem in Hebrew, presented in Yashayah, Isaiah 11, with roots, with branches, and with the fruit, as a tree, is the Etz of Diath, which is the tree of knowledge. And so that prophecy that is so extraordinary, because it not only associates a Neph sign that Yahweh himself is going to raise, that is written by this choder, but that the choder is the only person in human history that is imbued with the seven spirits of Yahweh. And we know for certain that that individual is a man, masculine, singular, and he's going to be prevalent in the last days. And what I was able to demonstrate is that everything about that presentation of the choder pertains to the tree of knowledge. He is the Etz Diath, just as the presentation of the choder acknowledges. And so he is directly associated with the tree of lives, being the one who points you toward it, explains who the tree of lives is. It's Dowd, how to capitalize upon what he's offering. It's really an extraordinary journey that we took yesterday through these things. But I think the second most extraordinary part of it wasn't just that it was God, not man, who caused the fall. He specifically, deliberately caused the fall of man. He said so. He used the verb nafal, which means to fall, and he wrote it such that he is the subject of the sentence and man was the object. He caused the fall of man. And that then prompts a whole lively discussion, which I engaged in last night, and I hope you had the opportunity to listen. And if not, we will do an entirely new series just on the tree of knowledge, how it leads back to the tree of lives, and the reason that God caused the fall of man, and what has transpired since, and what God's intent is since that moment. But what I would like to leave you with, just as a teaser for either to encourage you to go and listen to the first hour of our program last night, or to tune in when we return to the tree of knowledge, is that the reason God caused the fall of man is that before man would be sufficiently reliable to be allowed off of this planet and to explore the universe with Yahweh, before he would be interesting enough for Yahweh to want to spend time with him, he was going to have to develop considerably. The man in the cage was never going to amount to much of anything. Yahweh grew bored with him, and Yahweh realized that he had no desire to work, had no work ethic at all, and that he didn't particularly like to take instruction. And, you know, if you're going to be elevated to the point where you can explore the universe with Yahweh, you darn better well be able to listen to him, to take instruction well, and act accordingly. God's got to be able to trust you. And he knew and he proved that Adam and Chawah could not be trusted. And so we have been given 6,000 years to get our act at least somewhat together so that there will be a remnant of Yisra'el and some Goyim as the workers who are going to be allowed back into the garden. The gates of the garden and the earth restored to the conditions of Eden is going to transpire 8 years from now. And when that happens, the tree of knowledge will be interconnected with the tree of lives, and that those who are diligent and consuming knowledge will be led to the tree of lives, and that collectively they will learn what they need to know so that they become interesting, and that they have the opportunity to engage and contribute to God's story and family in ways that God says, this is somebody that I think would be productive going forward. Interesting, productive, and also given the opportunity to show that, you know, we can fall on our own, even apart from God. And when we do we have the wherewithal to get up? Now, I've always said that the most debilitating of all human ailments is, you know, not a heart attack. It's not being blind. It's not being deaf. It's not being mute. It's not being lame. It's having a bad attitude. We all experience downturns in life. Most of us, many. Personal, family, business, health. The question is, what do you do? And God's really not interested in spending a prolonged period of time with those who haven't been put through a trial, a test of some sort, a difficult circumstance, and risen above it, fallen, and gotten back up. And so this is going to be our opportunity to show that we are worthy, that we have the substance to be interesting to God, that we're good learners, that we're good listeners, we're responsive, that we can be trusted to be not only reliable explorers going forth, but also interesting friends and companions. That is why we're here. That's why the fall of man occurred, and what the promise is now that will begin to materialize again in 8 years, and you can be part of it in a number of different ways depending on your response to what you're hearing. But I can assure you, no one has ever told you these things before, and they are transformational. All right, so at the end of the program, we began a further exploration of what it means to be Gibowr. The most Gibowr among all humans, according to Yahweh, is Dowd David. Now, this is important for a lot of reasons. One is that in the human experience from the garden 6,000 years ago, back to the garden, which will be just 8 years from now, the most extraordinary individual lived right in the middle of that time. He is right in the center of God's timeline because he represents the tree that was in the center of the garden, the tree of lives. And in every way that Adam and Chawah failed, didn't work, made no contributions, didn't build anything, didn't listen, didn't respond, showed no initiative, seldom right about God, seldom cared about God, showed no fortitude. Dowd is the antithesis of all of that, and therefore Dowd is the one, the man that stood back up. He was by far the most interested student Yahweh ever had. He was by far the most devoted. He was the most industrious, built the nation, acquired its capital, wrote its anthems, defended the people of the country from all who would attack them some 66 times, was the most articulate person in Israel's history. Dowd showed that it is not only possible to fall and that you can get up again, that it is possible to learn and to be receptive and responsive to Yahweh. What Dowd showed most of all is that he wasn't perfect. And by not being perfect, he became interesting to God. Dowd showed that he wasn't always right, but he was always willing to learn. And as such, he became the ideal student for God. He was the builder. He was the defender. He was the man with courage and with backbone and with character. And so Dowd is, as Yahweh says, my chosen one, and I chose him for reasons that are different than the way you humans go about making such choices. But when you examine who he was, what he did, how he responded, when you consider his attitude and aptitudes, what you find is precisely what God is looking for. Dowd, therefore, is the first soul to be able to soar off of this planet, to be trusted to explore the cosmos with Yahweh. Because ultimately, Dowd showed that, yes, we as men are imperfect and we fall, but we can get up and we can rise to the occasion. We don't know all the answers, but we can learn. We don't always make the right choices, but we can be responsive. We can show that we are responsible and can be trusted, because Dowd came back in a second of 3 lives and fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Makorim, providing the greatest gift that has ever been offered humanity. Dowd is the one. So here we're turning to a narrative regarding Dowd that is prophetic of our time. So what I'm sharing with you, while it occurred 3,000 years ago, it is going to reoccur 8 years from now. It's the nature of most everything that Yahweh provided to us in his Torah and his prophets. They are not only past history, they are future history. Every time that we are challenged in some way, the first thing that we notice is that the text of the passage that would take us to that place and explain it describes our present situation and how we should act within it. God's a marvelous storyteller. So here we're picking it up in the midst of the conversation. It says they mounted Yahweh's own ark. This is the Ark of the Covenant, and it is Yahweh's. This Ark of the Covenant is a very important artifact, if you will. It exists today. It is in Yirmiyahu's grotto. That is directly under the place that Dowd, as the Messiah and Son of God, our Savior, was crucified by the Romans to fulfill Pesach, Passover. That means that it's beneath, at this point, the parking lot of the Jerusalem bus station, outside the Damascus Gate, with the encampment of Golgotha behind it. You'll see up on that shelf that I have. I don't know exactly where it is on the shelf at this point, but I know if my big head wasn't in the way, you could see it. But I actually have a white limestone that came right from that place. The encampment of cut into Mount Moriah at that point. And this is where Dowd served as the Passover lamb. And that's where, beneath that, and we have a little issue here with Kara expressing herself. You know, women are that way sometimes. And that is the case with this one. She has her opinions, and she's free to express them. And she now wants to get Wookiee's attention. So what we know is that the ark represents the covenant. It's called the Ark of the Covenant. It is Yahweh's. There were two cherubim on this ark, which, and I shared last night, if this were the ark, it is a throne. It's the mercy seat, the Kaporeth of the Ark of the Covenant is the Kaporeth, the top. So it's a seat. It serves as a throne. It's Dowd's throne, our former and returning king. The two cherubim are in the back corners, left and right corners. Each of them have one wing that comes out laterally on the sides, forward like this, so that like a throne, even this chair here, it has armrests. The two wings that come forward would be armrests for the king. The two wings that go behind the seat are backrest for this Ark of the Covenant's mercy seat, upon which Dowd sits because he enabled the benefits of it. And it contains the two tablets that Yahweh etched in stone, which are so instructive, and they'll be part of a presentation that I'm going to do here shortly. I'm very, very close. This weekend I will finish it, of an analysis of not only the two statements that were etched in stone, but of the creation account as it goes into the garden narrative. It is one of the most revealing things I have ever studied and ever shared. And so we will go into that discussion. But that is the nature of the Ark of the Covenant. It has the two tablets of stone. Sitting beside it is the original autograph, or the original scroll of the Torah that was scribed by Moshe, which will be an extraordinary thing to have. It's interesting that as we move to this point, particularly as we reach Kippurim, God's going to actually write a copy of his Torah inside of us. So we'll be able to witness the original copy and also reference God's instructions right just literally woven into our inner nature. So it'll be a rather extraordinary circumstance. The reason the Ark of the Covenant is important as it relates to Dowd is that Dowd is returning as not only king, but as the high priest. And it will be Dowd who anoints the Ark of the Covenant, consistent with the Torah's instructions, with 7 drops of the bull's blood. And the bull is the one who we're going to see is actually pulling this Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. It's a Bakar. Now, that bull in reality is actually a man. He is the same man who represents the tree of knowledge in the garden. And his name is Yada, and he is a key player in God's story. And his responsibility is to make certain that the Ark of the Covenant is properly positioned for Dowd. And as the bull, he will shed the blood that Dowd then uses to anoint the mercy seat on Kippurim, signifying that the relationship between Yahweh, Yisra'el, and Yehudim has been restored. So that is the story. And of course, there is another element to it, which is the Adamah Parah, which is this bloody red man of the earth who is a productive bull, is going to offer his Bashar body. He is the Bashar, human herald, on Teruah for the benefit of the mortal remnant of Yisra'el, such that she can be purged of her religiosity, of her religious guilt, so that she's not only prepared to re-enter Gan Eden and grow as a result of that opportunity and learn, but also so that she's prepared to be betrothed to the returning king, consistent with Numbers 5, based upon Numbers 19, the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah and the story of the adulterous woman. So there is a lot going on here, and as we move towards the fulfillment of Teruah in 2033, it's just the greatest show of earth. On earth, all those opposed to Israel will be incinerated. All traces of religion and politics will be exhumed from the earth. God's going to bring the potentially receptive Yisraelites into Jerusalem, where they can be purged of their guilt by this sacrifice of the Adamah Parah. He is also going to bring the Goyim with the best attitudes and aptitudes to be the workers of this millennial Shabbat, also in Jerusalem, so they can be prepared for entry into this 1,000-year time of Eden on earth. And so rather extraordinary things happening at this point. And this is all prophetic of the events that take place prior to that occurring. So it reads, and they mounted Yahweh's ark, his Aaron, onto a restored utility cart. And then they lifted it up and they carried it out of the house of Abinadab. My father encourages the willing to volunteer, which was on the hilltop. And so Uzzah, bold and influential, and Achiah, my brother, the sons of my father encourages the willing to volunteer, were leading and guiding the cart with the ark of God. And Achiah, my brother, walked before the ark. Now, as I tried to share previously, one of the things that I thought was so interesting in this discussion, and go ahead, Rich, go ahead and find out what is. We'll deal with whatever it is later. We had a honker outside, and we need to find out what was going on in our driveway. One of the things that is interesting, I pointed this out last night, is that the Ark of the Covenant was specifically designed such that it had two poles, the left and right side. Please, Asher, stop it. It had poles on the left and right side, and it was specifically designed such that it would be carried by men on both sides, forward and back, left and right, of the Ark of the Covenant. That was the intent. Asher. Goodness. No. Excuse me, but we have to have an inside voice that's appropriate with a dog, not screamers. This is a live stream. My wife is currently out, and the dogs are not behaving themselves. Excuse me. I apologize. So anyway, it's unusual for it to have been on a cart. We're going to find out the reason it was on a cart is because the Ark of the Covenant was being pulled by a Bakar, a bull. And that means that it was a bull that was repositioning the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem on behalf of the king, Dowd, just as will happen as we move forward 8 years from now. The second thing that is interesting is that the man's name, Uzzah, who is the bold and influential one, his name begins in the masculine and it becomes feminine. The name literally changes as this story progresses. And he is the antagonist in this story. He makes all sorts of bold and influential claims, but by his name. But then he is turned into a woman whom God kills because he, becoming her, interfered with the message God was trying to communicate about the role of the bull in positioning the Ark of the Covenant. So that is part of what you're going to witness here. So that first line I just read was Samuel, listen to him, 2 Samuel 6:4. All right, so it looks like we have quiet and peace. We got everyone's attention. Then Dowd and the children of Yisra'el were laughing and playing before the presence of YAHOWAH in all strength and songs, and with lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. It was a joyful occasion. The Ark of the Covenant was being brought into the city of Dowd and going to be positioned on the Temple Mount, and the tent of the restoring witness was already positioned and ready for it, and you had the king excited over this progression. And when they arrived upon the threshing floor, which would have, it's a goren, which would have been a flat surface, of Nodan, which means to remove wavering and wondering, which is exactly what the children of Yisra'el had done up to this point and what they would do subsequently. And so the threshing floor was named for the purpose of removing all of that. We find that Uzzah, still a man, bold and influential, he reached out with his hand and he positioned his hand thrusting it towards the Aaron, the ark, which actually is from the Hebrew meaning to behold the ingathering, to notice all things pertaining to being harvested of the Almighty. And he seized control of it by grasping it. No. God's instructions are very clear. You don't do that. Plus the fact he was having the ark brought forward by the BakarBull. It was already on a flat surface that would specifically avoid tipping over. And he was trying to take control of it, trying to say, I'm a big shot, man. I'm bringing the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And God says, no, you're not. It's the bull. Read the story that I have presented throughout the Torah, particularly read in Numbers 15, specifically focuses on the role of the bull relative to restoring the health and reconciliation, if you will, of God's people. So he seized control of it, grasping it, because the Bakar, the bull, was released and thrown down to cancel debts, freeing those who were indebted from all obligations. It is true that the bull is in fact going to be thrown down. He is in fact going to free those who are indebted with religious guilt from all obligations. This is the sacrifice of the Adam Parah, takes place on Teruah on the Temple Mount and direct vicinity of the Ark of the Covenant. And it is something that YAHOWAH will use as he brings the entirety of the mortal remnant of Yisra'el into Jerusalem to be purged of their religious guilt as a direct result of the sacrifice. It's a very long story, but it is an extraordinary story. This is the greatest show on earth that is being presented before their very eyes. But the story does not have a human helper. It has a man that speaks about what is transpiring here. His name is Eliah, known as Elijah. But this is not work that is being done by somebody who says, I'm influential. I want to intervene here and I want to play a role. No, God's got the characters all picked out. And an influencer is not among them. Therefore, the great frustration and displeasure, the zealous and deep consternation of YAHOWAH was directed at now. This individual has a feminine name. He is now become Uzzah. We have our first transgender, I guess, assisting the feminine portrayal of imprudence, resistance, and projection of influence. So the Almighty struck and destroyed this individual, killing him there over the imprudent and rash act, this indiscretion and error, because it was an overreach with the hand on the ark. He died there before the presence of God. 2 Samuel 6:7. All right. So this gets us very close to where we were in our last presentation. God is always going to sacrifice a life if it gets in the way of his ability to restore lives. And perfectly justified in doing so. That man wouldn't have had any life to have shortened if God hadn't given him life in the first place. So God's not depriving him of anything. And God is, by doing so, making it possible for those who are observant and thoughtful to appreciate the means that he is providing to elongate lives and emancipate the people who are responsive to him, who do as he has asked. You know, there's a story of another ark that we always have to keep in mind. And the reason I bring this up is that when God tells a story, he tells us what he's going to tell us. He tells us, and then he tells us what he has told us. And the precursor to all of this happens to be the story of Noah and the 8 aboard the ark that he built following Yahweh's instructions, the thing that made Noah successful, and the 8 souls aboard the ark, in addition to saving the animals that God cared so much about, was that he particularly, but then they listened to what God said and did as he asked. Simple. But it's more than just listening. It's more than just responding to what God has said. It's also engaging and doing. God values work. He values those willing to work, and not very fond of deadbeats. That's one of the problems of the garden. Adam didn't work. He didn't contribute anything. Noah did. And so this is the harbinger of this story that will come forward. And now we find that God is presenting how he, through this ark, the Ark of the Covenant, is going to liberate, emancipate, going to empower, enrich, and enable humankind. But at this moment, the Dowd didn't understand. And that's the thing that makes Dowd interesting to God. You know, because Dowd didn't know it all, he was in a position to learn. And he did. And because Dowd fell on his face on this particular instance, he says he got enraged, angry with God. Wrong response. He should have known the purpose of the bull. It was explained in Numbers 15. He is a student of the Torah. He's read it. He's written the 119th Psalm that shows he understands the Torah. He could have figured it out. Why that bull was there. Why it's not appropriate for anyone to touch the Ark of the Covenant. What God said about it, touching it prematurely. So Dowd was angry. He was even enraged. Because for the benefit of the relationship, he was hostile towards and broken up about Yahweh's anger coming forth, breaching this gap and breaking with the feminine manifestation of influence, assisting this imprudent woman. And so this place was called Peretz Uzzah, to break down the breach of imprudent and influential women, as an enduring witness unto this day. 2 Samuel 6:8. Now our king should have been frustrated that someone overstepped their role and that tried to disrupt, corrupt, if you will, the picture of the bull returning the ark while releasing Israelites from prior religious indebtedness and their guilt. He should have noticed that the bull would not have tripped by accident, nor would the ark fall and be damaged on the goren, the threshing floor, because that's where the bull is supposed to fall for the purpose that has been described. And Dowd would have been wise to realize the purpose of the threshing floor and of the grain that is harvested from it, especially since he had already acquired the Goren atop Mount Moriah. The symbolism should have been ripe. And Dowd was a very adept student. And so these are things he should have known. But the very fact that he didn't know them teaches us a valuable lesson. Even God's very best student, the man that God said, he's my chosen one, the man that God says, I love more than anyone else, the man that Yahweh offered his spirit and never took his spirit away from him, the man he anointed 3 times as the Messiah, the man that he declared on 3 occasions, he is my son, I am his father. This man among men, giant among men, was wrong. And yet we're going to find that he was willing to learn what was right and then not only respond appropriately, but rise to the occasion, joyously going forward, building on what he had learned. This is what made Dowd not only interesting, but the exemplar of what God's looking for in humanity to emancipate us from this planet so that he can spend an eternity with us. Dowd represented those things not because he was perfect, but because he was interesting. He was reliable. He was teachable. So once again, by way of a brilliant, directly applicable, and timely prophecy, we are reminded that Yahweh is aware and disgusted by the machinations of the insider group that has been so hostile to the tree of knowledge, to YadaYahowah. This is the mother goddess cult who are in breach of the covenant. They have gone and placed their hands on what does not belong to them. One malcontent woman has lured many others into cerebral incapacitation because of her emotional issues, into what is a leprous cult, engendering Yahweh's wrath. Therefore, Second Shamuw'el 6, the preamble to the most relevant prophecy presented throughout YadaYahowah, serves to put us all on notice that God not only foresaw what would transpire, he was already prepared with a detailed response. Now, reaffirming that Dowd had failed to learn the lesson Yahweh conveyed. Therefore, Dowd was distressed. Indeed, he was concerned and worried, even fearful, regarding Yahweh on this particular day. So he said, how, in what manner, what way is the Aaron of Yahweh to be brought to me? There he was. There was the Aaron of Yahweh. They were a matter of inches, perhaps a few feet apart. It wasn't a problem actually on bringing it to him on this occasion, then was it? They were there together. The issue was the Ark of the Covenant had to be positioned on Mount Moriah at the time that Dowd returns in 2033 on Kippurim, October 2nd, in year 6000 Yah. And that is when the Ark of the Covenant has to be brought to Dowd. And he's scratching his head now and says, how is that going to happen? You know, we had the bull. What is it? What do we need to do? And then, you know, a guy tried to insert himself, became a woman, a feminine influencer, and God zapped him, her. So now what? Dowd didn't go to the Torah where God guides us and say, maybe I can read something here that is going to explain this to me. so that I can figure it out. And after all, we turn to this because the mosquitoes that were sent out by the Mother Goddess cult decided to condemn my wife and I for sharing the obvious and truthful statement that in the garden, the apparel was a smile. And that God is definitely bringing us back to the conditions of the garden. That's the entire purpose of Sukkah in year 6000 Yah, beginning the 7th of October of 2033. We go back to the garden. And unless you're comfortable being exposed to Yahweh, you're not welcome. And the religious, of course, make so many stupid decisions, as does this cult, that they need all the covering that they can get. And so they were chipping away, claiming that none of this was true because I spoke of nudity in a favorable light, connecting what happened in the garden then and what will happen going forward. And so it was natural to go to Second Shamuw'el 6 because, well, if you don't know it or not, I did. I was aware of it. I had never translated it before. This was my first time, which is interesting since it's the preamble to my single favorite prophecy, one I've translated probably 20 times. Dowd is ultimately going to party once Yahweh explains to him how the Ark of the Covenant is going to be brought to him, wearing nothing but an ephod, which is the breastplate of the high priest. In other words, he was naked. And he was naked around Yahweh and the best of Yisra'el. And he was wearing the ephod because he's going to serve as the high priest upon when he returns to anoint the Ark of the Covenant with the bull's blood. But the reason he was naked is that, guess what, folks? He's trying to symbolically tell us that we're going back to the conditions of the Gan Eden, of the Garden of Great Joy. And that there we can party and be very comfortable celebrating our relationship with God, completely exposed to him. And so that's why I came here. And here we began with a transition into a feminine antagonist who tries to maneuver the Ark of the Covenant for herself. And the other argument that they will constantly bring in this particular cult, so it just helps us understand the ways that God's instructions are being negated, is that they will say that as it relates to Dowd and as it relates to our relationship together, that you ought not believe anybody who writes themselves into the story. And yet, what you find here is that I'm not writing myself into the story. God did. And he makes it really clear as to how everything falls into place such that ultimately the Ark of the Covenant is properly positioned and that God enables precisely what he says he's going to achieve. And the other issue is they constantly will claim that because there is a moment, I've never claimed to be a prophet, but the fact is that there are actually two times where the character that God is describing there's no other person other than myself that it can be. And in both occasions, that individual is shown being prophetic, inspired by the Spirit to be prophetic. One is when my Dowd joins Dowd after Moshe's meltdown, where he gives up on the children of Yisra'el. That's in Numbers 11. The other is chronicled in Daniel, where Michael, the one who's right about God, joins Gabriel, God's most courageous and capable man, which would be Dowd, in explaining the prophecies that would take place that transform our world, particularly pursuant to Dowd being willing to fulfill the role of the Passover lamb in year 4000 Yah, and then explaining the role that the same Michael is going to endure, live out, embody 8 years from now as we move towards the fulfillment of God's story. But their argument is that as a prophet, you can never be wrong. But that's not true. When Moshe had his meltdown, he said a lot of things that were absolutely wrong. And yet God calls him the greatest of the prophets. Dowd on this occasion was wrong. He was the most prolific of all the prophets. And clearly, as a prophet, what he is inspired to say would be right. But on this occasion, everything he said was wrong until the end when he finally was instructed. And so it isn't appropriate for someone to be right all the time around God. If somebody was perfect, they would be completely boring to God. It is our ability to be wrong and acknowledge when we're wrong and correct the record and grow from there that makes us trustworthy and interesting to God. And this is who Dowd is. And in this story, we see that in spades. So the argument that, he can't be real because as a prophet, he would never be wrong. Well, that's obviously wrong, isn't it? That's not what it means. So he's saying, how and in what way, what manner is the Aaron of YAHOWAH to be brought to me, this symbol of the ensuing ingathering? Well, God had a plan. Always has a plan. Listen, God knew what was going to happen long before these events played out. I mean, he actually explains what's going to happen way back on the fourth day of creation. This is after plants had been conceived, but before there were any animals on earth. He specifically says, this is how things are going to play out. There's going to be a greater luminary, a lesser luminary. They're going to serve as signs for the Mow'ed. And they would be these same two guys. They're the tree of lives and the tree of knowledge. They are the king and his herald. Same guys. So God's had a plan long before we messed it up. So, king, what is the point? If you're at odds with YAHOWAH regarding how the ark is to be treated, how's that going to work out for you? Or are you going to be in opposition to his intervention through the bull so that you can return? Isn't that maybe a not the best idea of all? You know, that story in Numbers 15, that the role the bull's going to play, you're right there too, king. You're the ram. You guys work together. So don't impede God's message of how the bull and the ram work together. So clearly, Dowd was unaware that at this point he would become very aware of it, as we have subsequently seen, particularly as we read through the 33rd, 34th, and 35th Mizmor, that Dowd was unaware at that very moment that a mother goddess cult would arise to discredit his Bakar Herald, while also stripping him of his future contribution as the Passover lamb, thereby negating all that we would achieve together. And that is why the king has advisors. That's why brothers support one another. I love Dowd, and I appreciate that he isn't perfect, knowing that that gives us another flawed but devoted coworker the opportunity to work together and to contribute something and become more together than we would be independently. You can buttress and buffer one another. We can equip one another, gird one another, teach one another as we guide God's flock through eternity. Moreover, it gives us something to chuckle about over a good meal well down the road. It's so much better that Dowd isn't perfect, because it makes him real, and it makes him approachable, and it makes it possible for us to work together in a collaborative way, because I most certainly am not either. And that is the beauty of it, isn't it? And so Dowd wouldn't be a Yehud if he wasn't stubborn. And of course, he was stubborn. So Dowd would not yield or consent, and he was not willing to change his approach regarding this with the Aaron, this beholding of the ingathering of Yahweh upon the city of Dowd. Therefore, Dowd spread out a tent for it at the house of Obed-Edom, the one doing the work and serving from Edom, at the Ha-Geti, the winepress. Oh my, Obed-Edom from the Geti, the winepress. Just when we thought that God has done his best work and addressed all of our concerns, he drops the ultimate truth bomb. Obed-Edom, which is the co-worker from Edom, is such a marvelous affirmation of what is expected of the bull, of the herald of Dowd, of Yada, serving Dowd going forward, that when I first saw Obed-Edom's name in this story, I was but a puddle of mush on the floor. I was stunned here when I beheld that name at this point of the narration. But even beyond this name and what it represents, there's also the realization that Obed-Edom came from Ha-Geti, the winepress. In conjunction with Dowd as the returning king, the arrival of the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem in year 6000 Yah, its anointing with the blood of this bull on Kippurim, when Dowd arrives upon the Temple Mount dressed as the high priest, the co-worker from Edom, which is what Obed-Edom means, and the winepress are among the most profoundly important pieces to be properly positioned in the portrait God is painting on our behalf. This is the stuff of destiny. Now, to drive this point home, I turn now to the prophet who wrote the textbook on proper chodering, which is to be a tree, the tree of knowledge. His name is Yashayah. He wrote these words. Who is this man, Zeth? Who is the one who comes at this time? Bo, who arrives and then returns at this moment out of Edom, from those influenced by the bloody red nature of Rome and harmful nature of the Roman Catholic Church and thus far the Western world. By the way, my DNA says that I'm Romano-Celtic. In reddish, chamuts, chrism, brilliant and vibrant red, which was yeasted, ruthless and cruel and oppressive garments. You know, the Adamah Parah is from Adamah, which is the bloody red man of the earth. And he comes from the sheepfold to gather and to protect. He, the man from Edom, he is the one who is shown great favoritism and who is respected, was honored on high, treated with distinction, considered noble and of high class, the best among men, even inspiring. Therefore, he is suitably adorned and arrayed, striding purposefully in the abundance of his influence and authority. Yashayah says, I'm sharing this message accurately to deliver and save a great many. Yashayah's Isaiah 63:1. The man from Edom delivers and saves a great many. The man from Edom is Obed-Edom. The Zebo men Edom, the man who comes from Edom, he is a single male individual, arrives at this time. He, like the Nakar, is a foreigner, not a Yisraelite. And that makes him particularly unique in God's story. He is also distinguished by the proclamation that he will Yashayah, deliver and save many. This is said of no one else anywhere in the prophets other than Dowd, our Savior and King. Turns out God's Son has a designated accomplice. Therefore, this prophecy, particularly when combined with the Obed-Edom role and working with Dowd to bring the Ark of the Covenant home, is profoundly important. It's among the most relevant prophecies ever written. How often do you hear people say, when will the man from Edom arrive? He saves many. When will he arrive? You know, there is no prophecy that says an unnamed Messiah is going to arrive and he's going to save many. But there is one that says, right here, I just read it, that the man from Edom will arrive and he will save many. And that he has been announced by no less than Yashayah. Now, Edom speaks of the descendants of Esau, Jacob's estranged brother, and therefore of reuniting the fractured family of Yisra'el. Esau was the eldest of the sons. He was deprived of his birthright by some chicanery by his mother. His mother preferred Jacob, who Yahweh calls a worm, and his father, Yishak, preferred Esau. He was a man's man. Jacob was not. Mommy liked Jacob. Daddy liked Esau. Mother tricked the father into offering his blessing to the second-born son. And so by coming from Edom, the implication is the fractured family is going to be restored along with the birthright. Now, he was so named because, well, he was hairy. And being based on the word for red, it also means that he was symbolic of that which is known to be hairy and red. And most people wouldn't recognize this. But we say Caesar Augustus, for example. What we're really saying is hairy Augustus. And of course, Rome was best known for its red. It wore red to terrorize all who would even dream of rising up against them. It literally, Caesar means hairy in Latin. Now, this recognition and identification with the beast of imperial Rome that became the Roman Catholic Church helps explain why Yahweh revealed that he came to hate him and considered him a harbinger of the hostile, vicious, and deadly nature of Imperial Rome and the Roman Catholic Church. The man coming out of Edom, however, has obviously distanced himself from such nastiness. Just had Abraham and Moshe, who walked away from Babel and Mitzrayim before they were usable by Yah. As such, my witness has been predicated upon renouncing all prior affiliations, both political and religious. Now, the reddish garments clearly caught Yashayah's eye as he was describing this man from Edom. And it is because they were stained in blood. The man from Edom, he is sacrificed as the Adam of Parah, this bloody red man of the earth, who is a productive bull, transpiring on the day of the Herald, Teruah, 24 September 2033. And he does so for this exact purpose, to save the mortal remnant of Yisra'el, a great many people, God's lost sheep. He will gather them, God will, on the evening of Teruah during the gleaning, well, after the gleaning and before the sacrifice, and then will protect them the following day with this final sacrificial offering of the Mow'ed, of the restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony. And in this way, the man from Edom will spare many, delivering a vast number of Yisraelites from their own misconceptions, so that they are prepared for Yahweh's return with Dowd on Kippurim, and for admittance into Eden on Sukkah. Now, since I did not write this and I have never sought a claim, you should know that those who don't like anyone acknowledging that they have been appointed by God, and they prefer to poo-poo all such claims, and that they are, well, Hadar, that someone actually would be Hadar, favored and respected by God, you can take your complaints up with Yahweh. The truth is that God found a choder, a stem representing the tree of knowledge, and he enabled him as a Nakar, observant foreigner, presenting the arrival of the Nakri as early as the 29th chapter of Devarim in the Torah, and then reinforced it through Dowd's son the day that the first temple was built on a Teruah 3,000 years ago. And the fact is that Yahweh and his Nakri, this choder, the man from Edom, have collaborated on a nesh, a sign, and a mis'ilah, a raised thoroughfare. And upon their completion, Yahweh's Bashar Herald will serve as God's coal voice, going from prolific writer to vociferous blogger. You're listening to that now. For being resilient and steadfast, uncommonly devoted and bold, deriving thousands of insights en route to the first realization that the entire story migrates out of Eden and then back to Eden. Yahweh sees the man from Edom as distinguished and inspiring on behalf of his people. And this is why the actionable roots of Gan, garden, and Sukkah, shelters, are Ghana and Sukkak, and they both convey exactly the same message. They speak of a protective and covered shelter. One to the other, out of one into the other. So just as Obed-Edom was from Gath, so is the man from Edom. What can be known about your apparel, Yashayah queries? Why is it red? And Is it that your garments are similar to one who treads within the winepress? Gath. Do you think it's just a coincidence that we have Edom and Gath associated with the relocation of the Ark of the Covenant, and someone who is, as we're going to see, highly valued by Yahweh in the midst of Dowd's story, preceding the prophecy about his return? And it's just a colossal collage of coincidences? That's not how my mind works. You can make your own decisions, I guess. Well, this is the same man separated by 3,000 years. Souls are like that. God can do with them what he wishes back and forward in time, which is actually quite easy for Yahweh. And it's difficult, I'm certain, for us mortals to fathom. But, think of it this way. No one has any problem with Elijah, being taken by Yahweh 2,880 years ago, with the realization that he's going to come back. No one has any problem with prophets being prophets, because God took their souls forward in time so they could witness what was going to happen and then write about it in our past. No one should have any problem with Dowd having 2 lives. He actually had 3, but in the second life, returning as king, because God says it vociferously. There'd be no purpose to the covenant if the children of the covenant don't have 2 lives, with the second being God's children. There'd be no purpose to Sheol as an eternal prison if those who have worked against God don't get a second life. Need to think it through. Dowd could not have fulfilled the prophecies that he wrote in first person about himself, of enabling the promises of Passover through crucifixion and matzah by taking our guilt into Sheol, had he not had a second of 3 lives. It's really not difficult for God to take a soul back and forth in time. And the reason that we're so caught up in it and have so much trouble with the fact that God told this story so that he introduced the key characters in his story, like those 2 trees. They happen to be men. They're not bushes. They existed 8 years shy of 6,000 years ago. The reason is that time is simply a dimension. I can stand up, I can sit down. I can move my arm to the right, I can move it to the left. I can lean forward, I can lean back, right? 3 dimensions. Time is the 4th dimension. Just because we're stuck in it doesn't mean that God is. God is 7-dimensional. He is not stuck in the dimension of time. I don't know how to maneuver in time, but I know that on a photon of light, time simply exists. And therefore, on a photon of light, you can enjoy witnessing the future in our past. And you can see the result of the future and report it in the past, so that you're not predicting anything, you're simply reporting future history. I know intellectually how that happens. I'm not prepared to maneuver in time at this point. I know I will be, and so will you if you listen to what I'm sharing with you. But God can maneuver in time. And so will we one day. And so by God being able to maneuver in time, and with souls, nepheches, being energy-based and therefore akin to light, and therefore they experience the fullness of time, God can take a nephesh forward and back in time at any point he wishes to. And if you're fixated on the body is nothing. The body is so meaningless to this whole equation. That's why the resurrection of pretend Jesus and the empty tomb is so utterly absurd. Bodies are meaningless. They decay, they rot, they are what trap us currently on this rock. The reason that God hasn't enveloped our souls in light energy at this point is that we have not shown that we're trustworthy enough. We don't know enough. We're not interesting enough. We're not resolved and dependable enough. We haven't been industrious enough and accomplished enough that God's willing to take us off of this planet and expose us to the fullness of the universe. And so that is why we are as we are under these circumstances. And that's not going to change until we're more prepared to be responsible. And when that happens, we will be able to maneuver in time as well. So a soul can go back, and it's all about getting rid of the liability of the physical body. While we have physical bodies, the furthest we're going to go is to the moon for no purpose at all, or to Mars to die. But that's it. That's the furthest we can go. And without a body, we can go to the far edge of the universe. We can explore all 2 trillion galaxies, each with hundreds of billions of stars, and maybe in the range of 10 times that or 100 times that in terms of celestial bodies. And many of them, I suppose, are going to have life for us to enjoy. So our goal is to have our souls be unencumbered by physical bodies and embraced by light, so that we have the opportunity to maneuver in the 4th, the 5th, and the 6th, and enter the 7th dimension. And for God to do that, because each step up increases the number of possibilities, increases the enrichment of the experience infinitely. And so we have infinity and going to the 4th, infinity, the 5th, infinity, the 6th, and infinity again as we go into the 7th dimension. We have to demonstrate that we're capable of that we're deserving of that we warrant that we can be trusted with that we're willing to listen when God says, don't do that, it's really going to create a mess. And we show that we're willing to listen. My wife and I had a discussion this morning, and she said, I'm troubled by, and I think it was the chariots that were troubling to her, as presented in Zechariah 6. And I said, well, I'd prefer to have a natural explanation. I think Rich even said the same thing. He'd like to have a natural explanation. I said, I wouldn't. And I'm not troubled by them. First of all, I'm not troubled by them because God said that's what he's going to do. It's in Zechariah. And I've learned that when God says that's what he's going to do, that's what God's going to do. And that I'm always willing to go where the words lead. If that's what the word said he's going to do, and he's going to do that on Teruah, and he explained the purpose of those chariots, I'm not going to vouch that the description of them is accurate, because there wouldn't have been the words in the Hebrew language 2,600 years ago to describe the kind of apparatus that God will probably use to accomplish this mission. But I can assure you that there will be the 4, and they will fit into those categories, and that God will use them in a supernatural way. And I realize that as we move forward in time and we reach the midpoint of this time of Jacob's troubles, beginning on the 18th of April of 2030, which will be Passover, when the 2 witnesses arrive, God's going to use all manner of supernatural interventions. There's going to be a scroll that's going to be above their heads, a giant scroll that I think is likely to show some of the YAHOWAH blog and some of the YadaYahowah text and citations from the Torah, from the prophets. And the world's going to be trying to kill those 2 guys, Elia and Yada, and yet they'll stand, and the Dome of the Rock and the Dome of the Hoofy Pit will be gone, and the Tent of the Restoring Witness will be there. The Ark of the Covenant is going to be restored in its position. There's going to be the altar for the sacrifice of the Adam of Perah. God's going to turn the sacrifice of this man into something extraordinary as it releases copious amounts of water from the Temple Mount and ignites the fire. He's going to transform the earth, removing all traces of religion and politics and militancy, and restore the conditions that are Eden. If you're not prepared for God being overwhelming with his intervention in miraculous ways, you're just not prepared for what's going to happen as we move to this point in time. So, my view is that's what God says he's going to do. There's no reason in the world that I would question that that's the way it's going to play out. And I've decided long ago, I'm going to go where the words lead. That is what they say. That is what I'm expecting. That is what I'm sharing with you. And I have no doubt it's going to play out that way. And for the reasons that God has enumerated. So the fact is that God chose his cast of characters long ago, and he weaves them in and out of his story as he sees fit. And it's the same characters that he weaves out in and out. It's the greater and lesser luminaries of Genesis 1. It is the tree of lives and the tree of knowledge of Bereshith, Genesis 2. It is the Eldod and Madod of Numbers 11. It is the ram, the goat, and the bull of Bob Midbar, Numbers 15. It's the story of the animal Parah and the adulterous woman of Numbers 5 and 19. It's Dowd as the man in the center of God's story, and it's Yada at the end. These are the characters that God has woven throughout time. It is Gabriel and Michael, as presented in 555 BCE with Daniel. And should this be an uncomfortable realization, then I would encourage discounting the mortal bashar conveyance of a nephesh soul while considering what can happen when our consciousness is enveloped in energy and light, where time is just another dimension. Consider the possibilities, the opportunities. You see, the co-workers have been few, and they have been very far between. Yashayah says at this moment, I have set out and I have walked within, trampling the wine vat, this wine press, alone. Among the people, there was not a single individual with me. And so all of my apparel is stained. Yashayah 63:3. Therefore, I was inclined to pursue in my best judgment a day of recompense, because the year of my redemption had finally come. Isaiah 63:4. The reason Isaiah is in hot pursuit of justice, of recompense, and of redemption is because Jews had universally ignored his advice and his warnings. And to such an extent, no one listened. No one. In fact, there wasn't a single person, and just the opposite. The more Yashayah told the Israelites that they should not be religious and they should return to Yahweh by acknowledging his prophets and his witnesses, the more belligerent and obstinate they became, and the more religious they became. Countless souls were squandered needlessly. It was devastating. So he said, having continuously looked and having found no one to help, the prophet said, I was devastated. I felt abandoned. And when it appeared that there was no one to provide any support, my Zeroah, my strengthened arm, sowing and distributing my seeds, the one cultivating a productive harvest, finally, my Zeroah, he's going to deliver victory for me by bringing salvation along with me, even to me. Although, to some extent, my disappointment and my emotional turmoil will still remain. Isaiah 63:5. He's ecstatic. The Zeroah is the one who is sowing the seeds of the harvest. Everything pursuant to the full chapter that Yahweh spoke through Yashayah, Isaiah, the 11th, on the Choder. Everything about him is a tree. He is the Etzah Dayath, the tree of knowledge. And he is roots. He is rooted. Netzir has branches. He's a Choder, which is shoots and stems. And he is Parah, productive, fruitful. And so wouldn't you expect that that same individual then would be a derivation of Zeroah, from Zerah, to have seeds which, when planted and cultivated and harvested, produce this marvelous ingathering? And so now he's realizing, wait a minute, that Choder is the Zeroah, and I was the one that wrote about him. I'm the one who wrote the textbook on this Zeroah. He's my Zeroah. And he's not just saving independently. He's saving based upon what I have written, his realization of all that I have said, and that, well, Yahweh said through him about this man, that he is this man from Edom. He's still talking in the 63rd chapter. He is this man from Edom who's going to save many. And he's going to fulfill the very prophecies that Yahweh has communicated through me. And just when I thought it was over, that there was no one, God has brought this man to do this job at this time. And this is the result. And Yashayah says, I'm ecstatic, except I'm still disappointed. Why did it take this long? Why was there no one? Why did God have to go to a Goyim? Why? What's wrong with my people? And even when he is introduced by me, even when he fulfills the prophecies that I have said about him, most Israelites yawn. You know, he's on X, for example, to reach the remnant of Yisra'el. And he has almost 30,000 posts for less than 2,200 followers. Oh, so what? Okay, so he introduced Yahweh's name. We don't like that name anyway. All right, so he annulled the whole myth of this Jesus so that, you know, we're not going to be persecuted by Christians anymore. And he's the first to prove that Allah wasn't a God and that Muhammad wasn't a prophet and that Islam is our mortal enemy and that we could fight it by understanding it. But so what? Okay, well, he was the first to acknowledge that the king of Yisra'el, Dowd, is the Messiah, and he is the returning king, and he's our savior. That's pretty neat, but well, so what? Rabbis don't agree with him. So Yashayah said, yeah, he is all of those things, but my people still aren't responding. Anguished. So this pronouncement clearly is emotional for Yashayah, because for the intervening period, Yahweh revealed that there wasn't a single soul among Yehudim willing to do what must be done to call God's wayward family home. He had written the primer on proper chodering, but no one was the wiser for it. Then finally, a day of redemption, when the choder is reestablished, the tree of knowledge is offering his fruit. And he's empowered by the seven spirits of Yahweh to fulfill this role. But it's no easy job. The Israelites are a tough audience, and the world is rife with rubbish. Those who engage with Yah are certain to be stained and stigmatized by the experience. And I can vouch for the fact that that is a reality, as it was for Yashayah. So clearly, the year of Yashayah's redemption has come. The prophet's revelations are now center stage, restoring Yisra'el as the Ark of the Covenant is returned, carried into the place that it belongs, back by the bull, just as he had hoped and foreseen. And while this was good news for the beneficiaries, the long line of naysayers who have precluded his message from resonating with his people will suffer a day of recompense and retribution. The prophet will seek vengeance against the religious and political leaders that he has impugned in the opening 10 chapters of Yashayah for the harm that they have done over the ages. Now, this is important that we have made these connections because Yahweh intended them, and such that we are now the first to realize that Dowd's Obed-Edom is the same man who 300 years later will be introduced by Yashayah, Isaiah, as the man who comes out of Edom to save many, and that he will be presented by Yahweh in the last days to accomplish this very goal. He will assume the responsibility, not only of returning the Ark of the Covenant so that Dowd can anoint it on Kippurim, as is required in the Torah, but of so much more. Preparing Yisra'el for the Messiah's return. This will be the closing statement that I'll make today on Shamuel. Listen to him, Second Shamuw'el 6:11, and we'll pick up the text at this place on Monday. Therefore, the Aaron, the ark as a means to behold the harvest of Yahweh, dwelt and remained in the Be'eth home of Obed-Edom, the one doing the work by serving from Edom, at the Gitti, the winepress, 3 months, while Yahweh blessed and commended, extolled the appropriateness, the usefulness, distinguishing an aspect of his nature to meet with and uplift Obed-Edom, the one doing the work while serving from Edom, in addition to all of his family and every aspect of his home and his household. Extraordinary. Shamuel, listen to him, 2 Samuel 6:11. So I'll leave you with those thoughts because it is evident that there's a very soft place in Yahweh's heart for Obed-Edom, just as there was in Yashayah's for the man from Edom, and just that they are both connected with Dowd and the remnant of God's people and the proper positioning of the Ark of the Covenant. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your Shabbat. Good day.